I've seen a lot of pictures, images, visual depictions of the cross over the years. I'm guessing you have too. And in a lot of them, and actually probably the vast majority of them, the picture seems almost serene, very calm. Kind of display this whole scene. You have a sort of a graceful hill with three crosses, kind of sort of the silhouette and sort of a backdrop of a sunset or sort of cloud. And I look at that. Was it this calm? Was it serene? This image of this experience of the cross? I can't really imagine the scene being all that calm. I mean, what do you have here in the story? You've got soldiers laughing, gambling. They're casting lots for Jesus's clothes. They're, giving each other grief. They're, kind of mock fighting with each other. You've got Jewish Pharisees and priests that are walking by or taking time to come and to mock Jesus verbally from the cross, denouncing him as this failed Messiah figure. You've got the women that we talked about in the last session. They're weeping and wailing and crying about what's happening here to Jesus. And of course, you have the criminals themselves. You have these three gasping for breath, crying out in agony over what they're physically enduring there as they're being slowly executed. All the sounds even of the onlookers, right? They crucified people near major roads, near the entrances to cities as sort of this public display. And so you've got a lot of onlookers. You've got a lot of people passing by. It's Passover weekend in Jerusalem. The city is packed to the gills. There are people all over the place. This scene is not calm. This scene is not serene. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot of noise, and there's a lot of hubbub. And yet, there is a disturbing quiet in the mind of Jesus. A quiet he's never before experienced, even from eternity past. He's never experienced this quiet. In that noisy scene, he's experiencing something for the first time. He's experiencing what it's like to not hear the voice of God. And it's that silence that causes more pain than the nails driven through his wrists. And it's more debilitating than the fluid starting to fill up his lungs. He's afraid. He's experiencing what we all experience. The fear of silence. The fear of not knowing where God is in the midst of this. And he responds in a cry of fear. The fourth word that Jesus says from the cross is in Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. And there it says, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. The word there for cried out, the Greek word there that Matthew uses, has this connotation of fear. It's a word that was used to describe the Israelites as they were fleeing out of Egypt, and they were there by the shore of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army was pursuing them, was coming over the hill, and they were ready to attack, and they cried out to God, afraid of what may be happening. And Matthew uses that same word to describe what Jesus does here. He cries out in fear. And he cries out in Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Think about all that Jesus' voice has done. From eternity past, Jesus' voice created mountains. Jesus' voice filled the oceans with fish. Jesus' voice filled the hills with trees. Just think, even in the story of Jesus that we hear in the gospel, think about what the voice of Jesus has done. And the voice of Jesus teaches the people. The voice of Jesus casts out demons. The voice of Jesus calls Lazarus out from the grave, back to life from the dead. And here the voice of Jesus is quaking with fear. It's quivering with abandonment. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's what silence does. It adds to fear doubt. It's adding insult to injury. It's bad enough that we have to suffer, but at least you, God, could show up and tell us that everything is going to be all right. It's bad enough that I have to endure this pain right now, but at least somebody could tell me why it's happening. At least somebody could give me some level of confidence or comfort to know that in the end, I'm going to be okay. And Jesus communicates so clearly what that fear, what that doubt, even that abandonment, what that feels like. My God, why have you forsaken me? The Nobel Prize winner, Elie Wiesel, writes in his book, Night, about the experience that he had as a young boy in the Nazi death camps. And he tells us about a failed revolt that took place among some of the prisoners there, and the prisoners were captured and they were publicly executed. They were hung on gallows there in the death camps, and they found some weapons near where a young boy stayed, and so they charged the young boy as being one of the co-conspirators and executed him along with all the others. And the rest of the prisoners there were made to watch as the Nazis took their Jewish prisoners and these failed rebels, and they took them up and they hung them. And Wiesel talks about having to watch this young boy struggle for life for a half hour before he died. And as the boy struggled between life and death, someone in the group, one of the fellow prisoners behind him, asked, "Where is God?" And somebody else from the group said in reply, "Where is he? This is where, hanging from the gallows." And the belief that God isn't there, or that God is dead, or that God doesn't care, or that God has abandoned us, and that creeping doubt makes us so very afraid. And we ask these questions that people have been asking for years and years and years, and people all around us are asking. Isn't God all-powerful? Isn't God all-loving? If God was all-powerful, and if God was all-loving, then I wouldn't be in this much pain. If God was all-powerful and God was all-loving, I would not be in this situation. If God was all-powerful and God was I would not be afraid. People have been asking that question and demanding this of God for years and centuries and millennia. So Jesus, as he says this from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He wasn't even the first to say that, right? He's quoting somebody. He's quoting David, who said it 1,000 years before. Right? In Psalm 22, right, David writes, this man who's a man after God's own heart, but who had experienced quite a lot of pain, painful days, painful seasons in his life. And he writes about that pain quite a bit in the Psalms. And in Psalm 22, he writes this, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish. My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. And then David goes on to describe his feelings of anguish, of fear, of doubt, of abandonment. And the way he describes them it almost becomes this sort of prophecies of what Jesus himself is going to endure. Right? David talks about how it feels as though his hands and his feet are pierced, how people are surrounding him and mocking him, how his strength has vanished, how his enemies are dividing up his garments, they're casting lots for his clothes. And David, in this terrible, difficult, painful season that he's in, expresses what Jesus himself, 1,000 years later, will himself experience. And that Jesus will use David's words to describe his pain. That Jesus will ask David's question. And David asks, God, aren't you all powerful? God, aren't you all loving? And Jesus himself, God himself, will ask those same questions. God will ask God, aren't you all loving? God will ask God, aren't you all powerful? And so for all of us who question those things, who question God's power, who question God's love in the midst of our own feelings of abandonment, here is God's power. God's power is seen in the cross. God's power is seen by God participating with us in our pain, by God taking our sin, taking our guilt, taking the claims of death on us. And here is God's love. And he's forgiving us, and he's making us holy and blameless in his sight, and he's reconciling us to him, and he's giving us a hope beyond all hope. Jesus suffers. God, who is all powerful, and God, who is all love, he shows that power and he shows that love by suffering with us, by suffering our fear, our doubt, our abandonment. He takes David's words, he takes David's questions, and he makes them his own, and he participates with us in them. And in return, he gives us his confidence. Jesus takes our fear and gives us his confidence. The book of Hebrews, that we've mentioned before, explains how Jesus is our high priest, how he's experienced everything that we experience. And so that we can have confidence to bring our own fears, our own questions to God. And we think, is my question, is my personal question, is my personal struggle, is my personal doubt, are those things too big for God? And the story of the cross says, no, God himself asked those things of God. God himself demanded those things of God. God himself felt abandoned by God. And so when we have those same kinds of fears, when we have those same kind of doubts, we can give them to God and we can get confidence in return. And that's how David ends his cry of fear and abandonment. It ends with confidence. This is how Psalm 22, the psalm that David wrote, this is how it ends. It ends with a confident statement of faith and trust. Here's how it ends. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. God will take our questions. God will take our doubt. God will take our fear and our feelings of abandonment, and he will do an incredible work. And all the nations will bow down before him. And future generations will tell each other about what God has done to restore our confidence in him. He has fulfilled his righteousness. He has fulfilled his justice. He has done it for us. Jesus gives us confidence when we should be afraid because he is participating with us. God is not leaving us alone in our feelings of doubt. God is not leaving us alone in our feelings of fear and our feelings of abandonment. But God himself is participating with us in those feelings, in that experience. Jesus gives us confidence when we should be afraid because he's participating with us in our suffering. And this is how God is showing his love and his power. And in the crucifixion scene, the Father does answer the cries of his Son. Not with words, but with one simple action. Matthew tells us that at the moment Jesus died, the veil in the temple, the curtain that kept people away from the very presence of God, only one person, one time of year, through an incredible ordeal of ritual and sacrifice, could go behind that curtain that kept people away for fear that God would strike them dead. God took that veil, that curtain, and he ripped it in two from top to bottom. We no longer have to be afraid, but we can enter into the very throne room of God with confidence, that we might find mercy, receive mercy, find grace to help us in our times of need. That's Hebrews 4:16. So, we need to practice this. We need an exercise that relates the confidence that we have, the fact that Christ is participating with us in our struggle, and that we can live with boldness, even before God, bringing our prayers, our petitions, our needs, our wants before him. So here's the exercise. Here's how I want you to practice this week, the exercise I want you to try. Jesus is participating with us in our suffering. We need to start doing that for other people, right? Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 26. He says, when one part of the church suffers, every part suffers along with him, with her. So how do we do that? When one part of the church suffers, every part suffers. Okay, well, how do we do that? I want you to think about intercessory prayer. That's prayer when we pray for other people's needs, right? Somebody's sick, or somebody has a family member that needs prayer, or somebody doesn't have a job, or whatever the case, right? Intercessory prayer is when we pray for other people's needs. I want you to start thinking about intercessory prayer as a way, as an act of participating in their suffering, right? When we pray for people, when we pray for people's needs, we generally tend to pray at arm's length from them, right? We pray for them if we do that, which is good, but we don't quite get sort of emotionally or connected or participating in their struggle. We just kind of keep them at arm's length. What I think Jesus is teaching us by participating with us in our struggle, right, is that maybe we should stop praying for people and start praying with people, either physically, right, to go with somebody and to pray with them, right, or to pray with them emotionally or spiritually. Make their prayers our prayers, right, to pray in the same way that they would pray. Make prayer an act of participating with them in their struggle because Jesus is participating with us in our struggle. Use their words. Use words you think they would use in your prayers for them. Pray with that kind of fervor. If we're going to love our neighbors as ourselves, right, this is what Jesus commands us all to do. Right, love your neighbor as yourself. Serve others. Think of others more highly than yourself. Then we should pray with that kind of passion. We could pray with that kind of boldness, where we can take other people's words and we can pray them ourselves. James says we need to pray for one another. In chapter 5, James talks about prayer for one another. But the word he uses for prayer is not the normal word that James used, or the writers of the New Testament talk about when they talk about prayer, right? When James talks about pray for one another, the word he uses is the word to make a vow, to make a commitment. So to pray for one another is to make a commitment of participation. It's to boldly come before God as a fellow sufferer, as a fellow struggler, as a family member, right? That's the commitment Jesus made for us when he prayed our prayers, when he experienced our rejection, our doubt, our fear, our abandonment. And because of that, the veil is torn. Because of that, we can go boldly to participate with each other in the suffering that's happening all around us, in the struggle that's happening all around us, in the fear and the doubt that's happening all around us. We can take those doubts, we can take those fears, confidence, take them to the very throne room of God. Because, after all, we're disciples, following Jesus on the way of the cross.